Welcome to Batya on NewsNation. I'm Batya Ungar-Sargon, and we begin with what we learned about America this week. The president traveled to Davos, Switzerland for the World Economic Forum, where the global elites gather annually to discuss the fate of the world. Well, whatever was on the agenda, it got scrapped when the president insisted that we need to own Greenland and threatened to tariff any European countries standing in our way. Of course, he never meant it. The Greenland gambit was designed to freak out the Europeans so that they would give the president what he actually wants, and he secured the framework of a deal within hours of landing. But don't be mistaken, this week wasn't about Greenland. It was about Trump's willingness to infuriate the pompous global elites to pursue America's best interests. It's what his supporters love about him. He's a finger in the eye of the elites who sneer at them while selling out them and their children. That's what we really saw in Davos, a split screen for the ages, sneering European leaders, doubling down on all the policies that destroyed the West and the working class, and Donald Trump showing the world what it looks like when you put your own people first. Just listen to French President Emmanuel Macron recommit to globalization.
China is welcome, but what we need is more Chinese foreign direct investment in Europe in some key sectors to contribute to our growth, to transfer some technologies.
China, our leading adversary, flooded our markets with cheap goods, brought up our debt and farmland, and is constantly undermining our working class. But France wants more. Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, doubled down on free trade.
The past few days, we've concluded new strategic partnerships with China and Qatar. We're negotiating free trade pacts with India, ASEAN, Thailand, Philippines, and Mercosur.
And just listen to Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, on what she thinks is best for Europe right now.
Europe will always choose the world, and the world is ready to choose Europe.
Did you catch that? Europe is for them. Trump is for you. That was Trump's message in Davos, this global world order in which countries who need us more than we need them think they can lecture us while it's our taxpayer dollars defending their freedom, in which the elites make policy that makes them rich and the working class poor, in which everybody comes before you. Those days are over. So how specifically does Greenland achieve these goals? Here with us now, we're so honored to have retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Mark Kimmett. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Certainly.
So my first question to you is, can you please explain to our audience the strategic importance of Greenland to the United States?
Well, I think anybody that goes out to the local toy store and buys a globe and doesn't look at it from the typical way that we look at a globe with the United States in the West and Europe in the East, but actually flips it over and turns it to the point where the United States and Canada are on the East and Russia is on the West. As you can see in your screen right now, it's a completely different view. The way we look at the world is because that's how you made the maps in the old days. But when you fly to Europe, you fly over Greenland into Europe. And the fact remains is what's standing between us and Russia is Greenland. And what's standing above us and Russia is Greenland. So it's a strategic piece of land that needs to be secured so that Russia and now China as well don't continue to take advantage of the gap that is building up on the water because of the warming of the global ice cap.
Can you explain specifically what happened in the last 5 years that made this even more urgent today than it has been?
Well, I don't think anything has made it more urgent. I think what's happened is people have finally recognized that it's urgent. People have gone to the toy store and bought those globes. I think people are now realizing, since the last administration, there's been an acknowledgement that this notion that the problem is coming from the West and going to the East towards us is not the greatest threat we have. Now, in the case of Greenland specifically, it's the advanced ballistic missile systems that are being developed that are able to launch from Russia and, in some cases, Iran, come over that polar ice cap and attack America. It's that simple.
What are you hoping is in this framework for a deal that the president says that they've achieved? Do you know anything about what's in the deal, and what do you think should be in that deal so that Americans can feel safer?
Well, I think what has to be in the deal is unfettered, unreversible access to Greenland, so that sometime in the future, even though we currently have a treaty, Denmark, for any reason, can say, we're pulling out of that treaty. America, you pull out of your bases. So there has to be an agreement, not simply a treaty, an agreement that can't be walked away from on either side.
So you agree with the president, who was much derided for suggesting that a lease is not good enough for the security of the United States when it comes to Greenland?
That's true. I would say that a treaty is not enough for the United States and Denmark to maintain access to Greenland. While a treaty is much, much more than a lease, it certainly isn't an obligation the way that we typically think of unbreakable contracts. And we need that unbreakable contract so we can put billions and billions of dollars of defense equipment like the Golden Dome up there and not have to worry that we come into work one day like we did in oil treaties and oil agreements in places like Venezuela, only to have the Venezuelan government nationalize them.
Now, sir, is there anything you've heard about the deal? Do you know what's in it?
No, again, the president came back with what he described as a framework for a deal. So I think they're just starting to put the bones on it. I don't think they're anywhere near to making sure that the deal is ready. So it's going to take negotiations between both sides, but there seems to be a level of confidence on all sides that we'll get there.
Now, the president was also much derided over the week for alienating our NATO allies. What was your reaction to the discourse around that?
Look, I've served in NATO. I've served in Europe for years and years. The Europeans make sport of deriding the United States as over the decades, while they have continued to free ride on the defensive capabilities of the United States. We spend 3 to 4% of the largest GDP in the world to our defense. They put barely 1% in the old days. That 2 and 3% savings that they have at the expense of the United States allows them to have their little social welfare paradises over there. And at the same time, while they're doing it, they're deriding the U.S. So I think it's just good to see that the president is a man that is not unwilling to stick his finger back in their eye the way that the Europeans have done to us for years and years.
Indeed, isn't it the case that NATO needs us a lot more than we need NATO?
Indeed. Look, there's an old saying about the founding of NATO. What's the purpose of NATO? It's to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. NATO, we've seen the attempts for almost 20 years now, in fact, more than 30 years, of the Europeans under this program called the European Security Defense Initiative, ESDI, where they tried to build their own independent European force. And it just hasn't worked. The best they've been able to do is some command and control in Bosnia and some operations on the water alongside of us. But the problem is people misunderstand one fundamental issue. There is no Europe per se. There are about a dozen to 2 dozen independent countries that have independent decision-making authority, that have no treaties among them. They need not only the GDP, the dollars, to glue them together for the defense structures, but they need the leadership of the United States, because they can't agree among themselves. The only thing they can agree on is the Americans are going to bring the stuff, they're going to bring the leadership, and they're going to make us cohesive.
Is your analysis that this was all just Trump derangement syndrome? Because everything you're saying is so reasonable and rational. Surely the Europeans know this. Are they just acting when they're feigning outrage that the president would say, we need access to Greenland to protect the United States? I mean, what other explanation is there for their outrage on that?
Well, look, if you think about American outrage like the knob on a radio, European outrage in America has always been at about 3 or 4. Under Donald Trump, it's about 8 or 9. But there's still incipient and underlying problems that Europe has, the European countries have with the United States. Some of that is simple jealousy, some of that is serious strategic differences. But it's always been there, but it just seems, just as President Trump has broken many of the rules of diplomacy and in many ways basic laws of courtesy, the Europeans have turned up their volume a little bit themselves.
General Kimmett, God bless you for your service to this country, and God bless and protect you. Thank you so much for joining us. That was very important for us all to hear.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Let's now bring in Michael Knowles, host of the Michael Knowles Show on the Daily Wire. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you as well. So what did you make of this really split screen that we saw of President Trump doubling down on America first and the Europeans just recommitting to giving China full access? All of the globalization that the entire Trump administration is designed to overturn.
It's amazing that Emmanuel Macron can even show his face in that crowd. And frankly, he didn't show his face. He was wearing those ridiculous sunglasses for some reason. Meanwhile, you have the Secretary General of NATO admitting that Trump is right, saying, yes, we do actually have to secure Greenland. President Trump in his speech, I thought, used really specific and effective diction because he pointed out that Denmark simply cannot control Greenland on its own. They just can't protect it. He's pointed out for some days now that their defenses are effectively dog sleds, and ever since Claudius killed Hamlet's dad, Denmark just hasn't been all that strong. And so this is obvious. We all know it. I think you're quite right, Batya, that President Trump was in many ways talking past the sale. Nobody seriously thought that Greenland was going to become the 51st state or have McDonald's all along the coast or in Nuuk. What we need is to have control to deter Russia. You've got a lot of countries bordering the Arctic, and most of them are on our side, but you do have Russia there. And to the general's point, when you flip that globe over, all of a sudden our threats are much, much closer. So, they make a lot of noise over in Davos, but the upshot of the whole thing was the United States is going to get what we want. They have no other option, and frankly, it will be much better for the West and for the world.
Yeah, I have to say my tolerance for Europeans who rely on our taxpayer dollars to defend their borders and their freedom has gotten very, very low when these people insist on relying on us and then think that it is their right to lecture us about things like diplomacy.
He made a mockery of this, the president, and it was long past due. I was so pleased to see it because the notion that Europe is somehow independent of the United States and the goodwill of the American empire is very, very silly. And the idea that our present liberal globalist order is effective in maintaining peace and sufficient is also silly. This is why I think President Trump's proposal of the Board of Peace was so crucial here, because he's proposing effectively a replacement for the United Nations. That, again, none too soon. President Trump is, without question, one of the most consequential leaders we have ever had in the United States. As the global order was fraying, as globalization wasn't working for the United States, Howard Lutnick made that point beautifully in Davos. Trump comes up there and he says, hey, this ain't working for us. We're going to rewrite the show, get on board or get lost. And by and large, the only pushback you really saw was Macron whining in his sunglasses and Al Gore booing alone from the audience. Fine by me. We're going to keep on and carry on.
I mean, is this kabuki theater, or do they really mean it? Is it just like the residue of European contempt for America? Or do they actually believe the things that they're saying?
The Davos set is itself the residue of European and globalist contempt for America. It's a ridiculous display. And so President Trump walks in there and makes that clear. It is amazing. I mentioned Al Gore booing and whining in the corner, but that itself is so exemplary of what's going on. Could you have imagined this 15 years ago in the peak era of liberal globalization? America's going to become weaker. We're all going to sing Kumbaya. and worship at the feet of the sun monster and the ideology of global warming. Now that's all over, and these guys are reduced to sitting still, shutting up, and hearing about how we're going to lead moving forward. Frankly, and this hasn't even really been talked about too much, the very notion that Trump is proposing a new order that could bring Vladimir Putin into the conversation and possibly box out China, that alone is a brilliant piece of triangulation. And Marco Rubio ended up getting a new job over the weekend because now he's going to be the chairman of the World Expo. But this again shows you that America is on the move in the world, not in the kind of Bushy era neoconism, which had us just bombing the Middle East at random, not in the weak and impotent kind of liberal globalization of the Obama era, but something different, a strong America that is going to secure our interests and, mirabile dictu, actually make the world a better and safer place while we're at it.
That is so well put. Michael Knowles, stay right with us. We're going to want your take on what's coming up next, which is the Democrats here at home are very angry over Trump's push to acquire Greenland, and Michael Knowles will talk to us about that as well. Welcome back to the show. Well, it wasn't just the global elites who were outraged at President Trump. The liberal elites here at home were equally undone. Donald Trump is overseas embarrassing America on the world stage, again, wrote Democratic House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries on X. The Democrats were enraged that Trump said he was going to have Greenland.
For an ally to invade the sovereign territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, which includes the island of Greenland, it is insane. It makes no sense.
And if President Trump continues to threaten to attack Denmark over Greenland and continues to try to coerce the Danes, it has the capacity and potential of destroying NATO as we know it.
Denmark owns Greenland, and we can't just invade a NATO country. That is insane.
But they were also enraged when Trump decided he was not going to invade Greenland.
He was never going to invade Greenland. It was never real. So that was always a fake.
This day showed Trump is not all powerful, that if you stand up to him, he'll back down.
The Democrats were furious that Trump threatened the all-holy NATO alliance.
He's going to blow up that whole alliance because he wants to be able to force Greenland into our control.
President Trump is risking a lot, risking a trade war with Europe, risking the collapse of NATO over really nothing.
These discussions, they're not helpful because they're pushing allies away from us rather than forging the stronger relationships with allies that we need.
But they were also furious when the crisis ended and Europe caved to his demands.
Donald Trump loves nothing more than to start a crisis that he could then claim credit for solving. It's a go-to move of his, and today we got the latest example of this on the world stage.
I can't take this complicity. People rolling over. I should have brought a bunch of knee pads for all the world leaders. I mean, handing out crowns and this is pathetic. Nobel Prizes that are being given away. I mean, it's just pathetic.
Which is it, guys? Pick a lane. Of course they can't. Their entire raison d'etre is to oppose Trump. Can you even point out what the Democrats' foreign policy consists of today? Are they for or against regime change in Iran? Nobody knows. What's their plan to end the war in Ukraine? No idea. How do we reign in China? No clue. You may not like all of Trump's answers to these questions, but at least he's got some. And by the way, it always comes down to putting you first. Here with us now is Michael Knowles, host of The Michael Knowles Show on the Daily Wire. Still with us, Michael. Thank you so much for being here with us. So why are the Democrats siding with Europe against an America First agenda?
The Democrats will side with anyone against America, as I think they made clear. I mean, Gavin Newsom literally comes out and scolded Europe for giving in to American interests, not just to Trump's interests, but the acquisition of Greenland has been a stated goal of the U.S. State Department since the middle of the 19th century. So this behavior, it's feckless and pathetic. It's also treasonous. I mean, it was a traitorous and disgusting display, not only to attack the President of the United States on foreign soil, but actually to encourage our negotiation partners to undermine American interests. Totally gross, but their talking points were ridiculous from the outset. They said, this is insane that America would occupy Greenland. An insane proposition. As if they apparently didn't know We've already done that. We have occupied Greenland before precisely because Denmark was not able to secure it. And Trump reminded the audience of this. He said, look, you know, we controlled Greenland during the Second World War because Hitler conquered Denmark and they couldn't control not only their overseas territory, but even their own country. And then we went out and defeated, notice he didn't say Hitler or the Nazis. He was broader. He said we defeated Germany, as if he was pointing in the crowd. Germany and Italy and Japan. And we saved you guys, and we actually saved the whole world order. And we're the big dogs here. You've proved the point that we are necessary to secure this territory from these threats, and we're going to do it. And I guess Gavin Newsom can cry about it because it means that America's stronger now. But that creates a pretty clear and stark difference when we look ahead to 2028. The Democrats want to nominate Newsom, who's doing everything he can to undermine America. I don't think that's going to play in Peoria.
Yeah, there was a real split screen earlier in the week when you had these sort of Davos elites recommitting to globalization, and President Trump gave a press conference here at home in which he did something very important for his immigration agenda. He stood up there and explained what it was all about. Let's take a look at that.
These are all criminal, illegal aliens that, in many cases, they're murderers, they're drug lords, drug dealers, they're the mentally insane. There's some of them who are brutal killers, they're mentally insane. They're killers, but they're insane. These are just in Minnesota and California. It's worse. In other states, it's worse. No, Minnesota, the crime is incredible.
So to me, it was so interesting to see this kind of split screen where the president, both in his foreign policy and his domestic policy and his immigration policy, is doubling down on this idea that he's protecting Americans, the exact opposite of what people like Gavin Newsom and what's happening over there in Davos. What was your reaction to that press conference?
Excellent press conference. As usual, Trump tends to shine at these things. But what he also did was expose the left for giving partial truths that actually tell a whole lie. So in these ICE raids, the left is trying to argue that it's only innocent people or American citizens or even children, you know, a 5-year-old child who has been arrested by ICE. And so, yeah, certainly it's true. Sometimes people who are not criminals are being arrested because the illegals aren't walking around with signs saying, Tom Homan, come get me. I don't have my documents. But even in the case of, say, the 5-year-old boy that the left has made much hay out of, the problem is that the boy's father is an illegal alien. And so, yes, I suppose ICE has to take care of the boy because the alternative is to leave him alone on a freezing cold street. Obviously, they're not going to do that. So then what is the alternative? What the left says is, well, the alternative is stop arresting the illegal aliens, even if they're murderers and rapists and drug dealers and all the rest. If any illegal has a child, we can't arrest them. Well, what that is to say is don't enforce the law. Don't have borders. Don't protect Americans. Let the drugs and the crime and the foreign nationals come into our country. And that's wrong. It's deeply unjust. It's against the law. But it's also contrary to what the American people voted for in November. They voted overwhelmingly with the popular vote for Trump specifically on this issue. So I think Trump needs to clear it all up. The left wants to pretend that it's sweet little abuela who's being ripped out of her kitchen making a paella by the Gestapo. That's just simply not what's happening. And when you present the facts, I think the left-wing narrative falls apart.
I agree with everything you just said, but I guess I want to know, have you seen anything that has made you uncomfortable as an American from ICE or from the immigration stuff?
Yeah, I've seen many things that make me sad. I'm sorry that that woman, Renee Good, was killed. The ICE officer was entirely in the right. That woman was entirely in the wrong. She hit him with her car. What do you expect? And yet I'm sad. I'm sad that this woman was brainwashed to think that she could obstruct law enforcement, block traffic, and drive an SUV into a cop. I'm sad that she thought that that would be acceptable and leave her without consequences. And in fact, she probably thought that because the left, especially in Minnesota, has encouraged that kind of behavior for years now. I'm sad that we got to this point where they let in tens of millions of illegals. Now we have to clean up the mess. And the only way that we stop seeing these sad scenes is to do the right thing.
Michael Knowles, God bless and protect you. Thank you so much for joining me. Coming up, Democrats and their allies in the media want you to think Americans do not support deporting people who are in the country illegally, but the polls tell a very different story. There's been a lot of talk about the president losing support, especially on immigration. Polls last week suggested that a majority of Americans had lost faith in ICE. And there's a new poll from Siena and the New York Times that finds President Trump underwater with voters. Just 40% approve of the job that he's doing on immigration. Yet the goal he's trying to accomplish still has broad support. Despite all the chaos, despite the tragic shooting of Renee Good, despite all the negative press generated about ICE, half of Americans still support the Trump administration's deportation of immigrants living in the United States illegally, while 47% oppose it. Now, contrary to what the liberal media would have you believe, that's not support just for deporting the worst of the worst. That is support for deporting every illegal migrant in the country here illegally. Now, other polls have even higher levels of support. Surprisingly, the new New York Times poll has independents supporting Trump's deportations by a 12-point margin at 54%, and even 42% of Latinos approve of his deportation agenda. Here with us now, former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton, Richard Goodstein, and former Democratic strategist and author of Nothing Left, Evan Barker. Thank you both so much for being here. Evan, I want to start with you. You're from a working class Midwest background, people who were Union Democrats for generations who now are very big Trump supporters. This is the exact constituency that everybody's going to be fighting over in elections to come. Explain to us why immigration is so important to working class Americans.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Batya. So basically, as you already stated, my family used to vote for Democrats, and the majority of them, all but I think one at this point, has switched over and now ardently supports Donald Trump. And, you know, it's important for many reasons. I think, you know, I actually live in California now, and I find that this issue of immigration is the most difficult for them to wrap their heads around. And I think part of it is that, you know, in a place like San Francisco, there has been a whole parallel economic system set up to invite illegal immigrants, undocumented people over to this country to work, to provide cheap labor to upper middle class, to wealthy Democrats, as you so often point out, and to basically make it cheaper for them to live, to make their lives easier. And then you contrast this to small town Missouri, right, where there isn't unlimited resources for rent assistance. The schools don't have adequate funding. You know, the rents are exploding for people like my mom and grandma who, you know, live together in an apartment building with many, many migrants, actually. I'm not sure of their status, but it has, you know, increased the rents for them. They've seen it with their own eyes. And so I think that they see their economic position slipping away, and then see at the same time the Biden administration allowing all of these people to flood into the country and giving them things like Medicaid in California and rental assistance and free hotels in New York City. And it is extremely infuriating to them when their lives have basically worsened in every conceivable way over the last 30 years.
Richard, your reaction.
So in that New York Times poll, Trump is underwater by 17 points on the topic of immigration. And I think it's cartoonish to talk about it as, you know, one or the other. There's two issues at work. One is getting out bad guys and sealing the border. And I think on that, Democrats generally think, bravo, we should have done it, you did it, great. But what nauseates people is when they turn on the TV every night and they see these ICE people deploying these Nazi tactics. I'm sorry, mass people in unmarked vans, grabbing people out of their cars who are simply protesting, a pastor shot in the head in Chicago, a 4-year-old who was in chemotherapy being deported, who was an American citizen. That kind of, and Renee Good, you know, I heard what Michael said about she drove into him. Look at the video. That's just simply not true. If the guy had been doing something other than using his phone and a gun at the same time, he would have seen what was going on, which is that she was steering away from him. And this myth that somehow or other she was trying to take him down, that's all it is. And everybody in the public sees that. And I think where Trump is hurt is he believes people like Michael Knowles. And that's why everybody, the young, non-white, have made a total U-turn in the polls and at the voting booth. The reason that Trump and Republicans took it on the chops in pretty much every election, federal, state, and local, in 2025 is because they're turned off by what's happening on the streets and immigration, in addition to the cost of living and everything else.
But can I ask you to respond just to what Evan said about how voters, I agree with you that there has been a shift on this topic in terms of voters watching the news, et cetera. But to me, it seems laughable that they would then give power back to the Democrats on this issue, given everything you heard from Evan, specifically about how working class voters feel like their fortunes were abandoned. Can you respond to
Sure.
that?
Donald Trump campaigned on a lie. He said, I'm going to bring prices down. Every economist would have told him, short of a depression, you can't do that. And guess what? People are angry because, and the middle class that Evan's standing up for, they're paying higher prices. They're paying much higher prices, radically higher prices, for health care. Because I think Evan would probably tell you that health care is really important to her and her family. Whether it's Obamacare or everything else.
Okay, let's actually bring Evan in to talk about this, because Evan, you do talk about health care a lot and how important it is. I assume that you feel very positively about the immigration agenda. What is your explanation for why Trump is suffering in the polls?
Yeah, so I do agree. I think that overall, you know, when I talk to people in my family back home, they don't like seeing images of 5-year-olds being detained by ICE. You know, like, obviously, you know, they're people with good hearts, and that bothers them. At the same time, you know, the mandate was, from their point of view, that they wanted every illegal immigrant out of the country. It doesn't matter if you just came across the border and you overstayed your visa, or if you came here and committed a horrible crime. That's what they voted for. They feel Joe Biden let 20 million people in. We can debate the numbers, whether it was 10 million or 20 million. And at this point, there has to be a fierce reaction to what happened. Now, as you know, to what your guest just said about healthcare, yes, I do talk about healthcare. I think that the biggest mistake that this administration has made is that they defunded Medicaid and have now let these Obamacare subsidies lapse without any real plan to reform healthcare. I think that they should have.
Absolutely. It's something that I try to explain to them a lot, which is that when you cut subsidies and then give tax cuts to the rich, you're taking benefits from poor Republicans and giving them to rich Democrats, because most rich people in America today are Democrats. Evan and Richard, thank you both so much for joining me. And Protect You, please come back very soon. Coming up, Governor Newsom goes to Davos. Why President Trump called his appearance embarrassing. That's next. Trump and his team weren't the only ones in Davos this week. California Governor Gavin Newsom, on your screen there, was seen skulking around trying to get in front of cameras and register himself as the chief opposition to Trump. Of course, once Trump was in the room, that's what you're seeing here, his tough guy act kind of disintegrated. As my friend Nina Turner astutely noted, all that tough guy talk, and he just stood there and took that from President Trump. Gavin Twitter fingers Newsom. Oof. Of course, you can't leave Davos without taking a photo with the kingmaker, the son of the Democratic mega donor George Soros, Alex Soros, who has a wall full of political trophies he's collected over the years. Gavin Newsom, who encouraged people to march in No Kings rallies to protest authoritarianism and has decried the oligarchy, finally pictured in his natural habitat at a meeting of the ultra-rich, posing with the ultimate Democratic Nepo baby oligarch himself. Here to discuss is host of The Orange Report and author of Drawing Lines, Kira Davis. Kira, thank you so much for being here. What was your reaction to Gavin Newsom in Davos?
Some of it I can't really say on your show, just for your sake. But I got to tell you this. He was there. He's selling his knee pads now. You've seen those, right? He's selling knee pads for $100. You think that's really cute. But you know what? While he was in Davos, gubernatorial candidate Steve Hilton was on the campaign trail. He's been on the campaign trail here in California. We have an election coming up in 26. And he was at a campaign stop, I think in the Central Valley. And there's video. I posted it to my timeline. And there is a woman who is crying, weeping in his arms, saying these new property tax policies that we have here are going to cause her to have to unload her family's third generation home, and her kids can't afford the taxes, and she can't even afford to pass it on to them because of California's death tax. And she's weeping, and she's losing everything. And what's Gavin doing at that very moment? He's in Davos making fellatio jokes, selling knee pads, while this woman is losing everything. So on the one hand, it is amusing and it's sort of pathetic to watch him preening around and peacocking around for people who definitely don't like him. But it's also very insulting to be here in California and watch people suffering in real time as he's doing it. May I remind you, Batya, he is still the sitting governor of California. And he's in Davos for what? So we all find it grossly insulting, but I want Californians to look at that with open eyes and understand this is what they think of you.
I mean, tell the rest of America what we can expect if he's the Democratic nominee in 2028 and becomes our president.
Well, why don't you take a trip down to Skid Row in LA, which when I moved to California 20 years ago covered about 4 or 5 square blocks. Now in 2026, it covers 25 square blocks. Although the city of LA has spent tens of billions of dollars in the last 4 years alone, let alone the state. So you can expect more homelessness. You can expect fewer. I know a lot of people are concerned about affordability and buying homes. Here in California, we have now generations of people who can't afford to buy homes where they live, can't afford to stay with their families. And that's on purpose. That's on purpose. And so that is what you will get in the rest of America, too. You will get a government that doesn't care about your right to own property and, in fact, works against it, who looks at you as the unwashed masses, tells you to stay home, stay locked in your house while he goes out and buys $10,000 a night plates. That's the type of government. It's elitism. That's the type of government you'll get. The type of consequences you'll get are what that woman are dealing with right now, which is not just increased crime and homelessness and border issues, which is bad enough, but it's just the complete destruction of your family legacy. That's the legacy of the Democrat Party right now. That's what Gavin Newsom is running on, and I find it absolutely pathetic. He's still the sitting governor. One home has been built in the Palisades so far. He's a joke.
It's so amazing because in the name of their compassion and this sort of very expansive welfare state, you end up actually creating much more misery. Isn't that accurate, Kira?
I think that that's the intention.
Yes.
I think at some point, I'm 51 now, so I'm kind of going through a new, I'm coming out of being a mom, and I'm in an empty nester, and I'm in this new mental state, and I'm realizing that people teach you how to treat them. Right? People will get away with as much as you'll allow them to. And you have to look at the results.
Very
and so with
well
the results
said,
we've
Kira.
seen, you have to say it's on purpose.
Thank you so much for joining us. God bless and protect you. Coming up, my winners and losers of the week, the tennis star that stayed focused on her game and the former news anchor who disrupted a church service. Welcome back to the show. So who won the week and who lost? We're going to start with the loser. On Sunday, a group of protesters barged into a church and terrorized Christians at prayer, chanting anti-ICE slogans and shouting in the faces of women and children. It was an absolutely disgusting display and also an illegal one. 3 of the main instigators were arrested on Thursday, but one very conspicuous participant was not. Don Lemon, the former CNN news anchor who live streamed the event and went on to berate the pastor of the church and then to praise the protest when he noted how traumatized the children looked. Yes, really. A Minnesota judge declined to bring charges against Lemon, but he's still a big loser in my book. And now for the good. Tennis star Amanda Anisimova was asked by a reporter to denounce the U.S., but Anisimova was having none of it. Take a look.
I've been asking a lot of the American players just how it feels to play under the American flag right now, and I'm curious how you feel.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in America, so I'm always proud to represent my country.
Sorry, just to clarify a little, I mean, sort of in the context of the last year of everything that's been happening in the U.S., does that complicate that feeling at all?
I don't think that's relevant.
What a star. We've all been in situations where someone is pressuring us to denounce our people. Every day we have opportunities to be proud of who we are and where we come from. Amanda Anisimova reminded us all how. Thank you all so much for joining me. It's been an honor to have you. May God bless and protect you and the United States of America.